We're at 25 Cecil Street, the Steelworkers Canadian headquarters. My name is D. Shanger. I'm a mod and live stream director here at Occupy Toronto since day one, almost 4 years ago on October 15th, 2011. This is Tuesday night, September 29th, 2015 for the Deep Archive. Yes. So we are, here we go.
Hello, live stream. We're about to get started.
Good.
Just
We're live.
Turn the volume up a little bit. Was okay. Okay, a little louder. Maybe a bit more. A little more for folks in the back. Mic check, mic check. Is that better? Louder? Maybe a tiny bit. We have a hidden person doing tech behind the scenes. Is that good? Okay. Okay, great. Thanks for being patient. I think the rain caused people to move a little slower, which is totally okay. Shanger, I apologize. Jesse's actually watching us from there.
Okay.
Yeah, so just don't block. Yes. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. We're very excited about this panel. My name is Lana. I'm an Indigenous Solidarity organizer and environmental justice organizer in Toronto, and I'll be moderating the talk tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Mississauga, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron, and likely other nations before that. In terms of accessibility, just so everyone knows, the washrooms are over there. The women's washrooms are over there, and the men's washrooms are just over there. And so this panel was a group effort among several organizations, including the Centre for Social Justice, East End Against Line 9, West End Against Line 9, Toronto 350, and Rising Tide Toronto. As you may have guessed, many of these groups have been engaged in the No Line 9 campaign over the last 3 years. And for those that aren't familiar, just a quick introduction. Line 9 is the local tar sands and fracking pipeline that we've been fighting here. It would carry these products from Sarnia to Montreal, and there they would be shipped through the Montreal-Portland pipeline to Portland, Maine, and then out for export. So organizing against Line 9 has been our way of doing our part in stopping tar sands expansion. That's better. And the logic of pipeline resistance is that if we can stop new pipelines from going online, then it makes it very difficult for tar sands companies to put in new projects and export the product. And so as we've seen across the continent, people are organizing against pipelines, going in every direction, and this is something we've been doing here as well. And for most of us, the Line 9 campaign hasn't been a not in my backyard kind of issue. Most of us have been organizing because of our desire to stop tar sands expansion. And you know, for us, the concerns are impacts on Indigenous communities, the impact on climate change, and local environments, and so forth. But of course, there are local concerns as well, especially the fact that many of the First Nations communities along the pipeline haven't been consulted on the project as required by the Canadian Constitution. And in fact, we've been supporting a community called Chippewa the Temps First Nation, which has taken the issue to court and legally challenging the National Energy Board and the Canadian government for not consulting with the community that would be impacted. And of course, the pipeline is 90% likely to rupture. It would put at risk rivers and our drinking water, communities, very highly populated neighborhoods, and so forth. And I guess just to mention, it has been a few years, a 3-year campaign, and we have successfully delayed the project by at least a year, which is significant as well because this impacts investor confidence. And we've collectively, and this is groups in Toronto as well as other groups in southwestern Ontario and people in Quebec as well, collectively, have achieved this and cost the company some major money. But of course, at the core of what we are doing is based in our opposition to the tar sands, a project that benefits giant oil corporations at the expense of people, animals, ecosystems, and indeed the entire planet. So we're very happy to be jointly hosting this event, particularly in light of this recent debate sparked by Linda McQuaig's comments about the tar sands. Who here heard these comments in the ensuing debate? Okay, so quite a few people. For those that didn't hear about it, at the beginning of the federal election campaign, Linda McQuaig, who is the Toronto Centre MVP candidate, stated, and I quote, "A lot of people recognize that a lot of the oil sands oil may need to stay in the ground if we're going to meet our climate change targets." So this sparked a media backlash, even criticism within within her own party, accusations that she's ideologically driven, anti-Alberta, anti-jobs. So these are the things that we wanted to address today and set the facts straight. And so we've invited some of the biggest specialists on the tar sands to share information so that we can make our opinions based on solid information. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. First we have Andrew Nikiforuk. He is an award-winning investigative journalist who has been writing about the oil and gas industry, energy, and economics for more than 2 decades. Andrew's journalism has won 7 national magazine awards and top honors for investigative writing from the Association of Canadian Journalists. His book, Tar Sands, which criticized the pace and scale of the world's largest energy project, was a national bestseller and won the 2009 Rachel Carson Environment Book Award. And Andrew lives in Calgary, Alberta, so we're very lucky to have him here in town and on this panel today. Jesse Cardinal, who will be Skyping in a little while, is Métis from the Kikono Métis settlement in northern Alberta. She is the coordinator with Keepers of the Athabasca, a watershed protection group that is comprised of First Nations, Métis, settlers, and scientists who work together to bring light to the need for the protection of water. Keepers of the Athabasca is a subgroup of the larger Keepers of the Water organization. Jesse has been involved in organizing many events, such as the Tar Sands Healing Walk, Idle No More events, and conferences. Justin Potter is a professor at the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York University. His undergraduate degree was in physics, where he worked as a summer student on a project analyzing atmospheric radiation. He has published in journals including Ecological Modeling, Ecological Applications, and International Journal of Wildland Fire, including studies modeling future forest fire scenarios under climate change. And Carolyn Egan, who will be joining us shortly, she's just upstairs, is the president of the United Steelworkers Area Council and co-chair of the Good Jobs for All Coalition. She is co-chair of the Green Jobs for All subcommittee within that coalition and has mobilized steelworkers to take part in climate justice demonstrations in Quebec City and Toronto. And I'd also like to mention that Carolyn and Steelworkers Toronto have been very supportive in the No Line 9 campaign over the last few years. So I will hand it over to Andrew to start us off and give us the big picture, the big gloomy picture.
Thank you very much, Lana. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here tonight. I think I argued back in 2008 that if Canada did not have a national debate about the pace and scale of development in the tar sands, then this country would be living a political emergency because of the power of the corporations involved in the project, as well as the stream of money going to Ottawa. And we are now living that emergency. And who would have, predicted that in 2008 that in desperation to find markets that really should not exist, so many pipelines would be proposed in this country and paraded around as though they were some kind of national development scheme. Pipelines don't develop anything. Pipelines extract materials. Bitumen should stay in the ground because it is a low quality, extremely low grade hydrocarbon. It was once light oil, and bacterial action over millions of years reduced it into this tarry sludge that is stuck to sand particles that have the sharpness and corrosiveness of diamonds. And it takes about 2 tons of sand to make 1 barrel of bitumen. And furthermore, it takes 1.3 barrels of bitumen to make 1 barrel of synthetic crude. And the reason for that is that we have to reverse geology. The product is so crappy and so badly biodegraded that we must pull the carbon molecules out, and we must inject all kinds of hydrogen in order to enrich it to make a product called synthetic fuel. Bitumen should stay in the ground because really it is no longer economic at current low oil prices of 40 bucks a barrel. And the money that we have put into the tar sands, which is now in excess of $200 billion, I mean, it is the world's largest energy project, really should have been invested in renewables, should have been invested in a transition. Bitumen should stay in the ground because of its paltry low energy returns. Cheap oil and light oil, more than 100 years ago, if you took 1 barrel and invested it in drilling in the ground, you could capture and produce and extract 100 barrels more. As oil and as the world's large oil fields have all been depleted over the last 100 years, it's becoming more and more difficult to get those huge energy surpluses. So currently, around the world, it takes about 1 barrel of oil or oil equivalent to extract another 20 barrels. That's not what's happening in the tar sands. In the mining projects, it takes 1 barrel of oil or oil equivalent, largely in the form of natural gas, to produce 4 or 5 barrels of oil. For the steam plants, where you are burning natural gas to boil water, to inject highly pressurized steam into the ground in order to melt bitumen, very deep deposits of bitumen, your energy returns are 1 to 2 or 1 to 1. A civilization no civilization can exist on energy returns that marginal. Bitumen should stay in the ground because the steam plants, which now produce 50% of the bitumen being produced in the tar sands, use 4 times more natural gas than the mining projects. And most of that natural gas is being fracked in shale basins underneath First Nations land in northern BC. And in the process of fracking these deep shales, enormous amounts of water are being used, and earthquakes, we're talking about thousands of earthquakes, have been caused throughout these geological formations in northern BC. Bitumen should stay in the ground because it is still the world's dirtiest hydrocarbon. Of 30 oils currently ranked by some of the world's best top energy researchers, extra heavy synthetic crude from Canada still produces the highest amount of greenhouse gases. 17% more than conventional oil. Bitumen should stay in the ground because the tar sands remains the largest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in the country, bar none. More than 12% of the nation's emissions are now coming from this project. By 2020, the emissions from this project will exceed all of the emissions from all passenger vehicle traffic. That's cars, that's trains, that's buses in Canada. And it is why we can meet, why we have failed to meet every target we have promised to meet. Bitumen should stay in the ground because the banks say it will soon become a stranded asset because of the growing demand for action on climate change around the world. They say, look, it's the world's most expensive oil, and it is therefore a very high-risk investment. And these banks, including the Deutsche Bank and including HSBC, which is my bank and a bank, I might add, that has done a very good job of laundering cartel money in Mexico, among other fine achievements, says that these high-risk reserves will probably be unburnable. Furthermore, the HSBC adds that capital-intensive, high-cost projects such as the heavy oil sands are at the most risk under any scenario that deals with addressing climate change. Bitumen should stay in the ground because the agenda for its extraction has greatly undermined and threatened the democracy of Canada. Harper has muzzled scientists, climate change scientists, water scientists. The Harper government has attacked First Nations groups and accused them of being, foreign paid radicals. The government has systematically gutted all of Canada's oldest and finest environmental regulations, from the Fisheries Act to the Navigable Waters Act, all to ease the extraction and movement of bitumen in pipelines in this country. Bitumen should stay in the ground because North America and Europe are now consuming less oil. This is a whole new radical development that is taking place in the Western world as oil demand has begun to stagnate. Bitumen should stay in the ground because the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy concluded many years ago that expanding the tar sands and fighting climate change were not compatible. And so what happened? As a consequence, the Harper government shut down the roundtable, stopped funding it, said, look, we don't need this organization. And John Baird explained the abrupt closure of the roundtable, which was a very conservative group, I might add, saying that the Harper government shut it down because, quote, it should agree with the government. And I imagine the rest of that quote would be, and not with the science. Bitumen should stay in the ground because the production of roughly 3 million barrels of bitumen a year currently creates enough air pollution to slicken snowpacks within a 50-mile radius of the project with bitumen particles and heavy metals. And when that snow melts in the spring, an oil spill of nearly 15,000 barrels enters the Athabasca River and moves downstream towards the community of Fort Chip and into Lake Athabasca. And that happens every year. Bitumen should stay in the ground because no oil exporting nation has ever made a transition towards green energy. What are the leaders? The leaders in green energy all around the world are oil importing nations. They said, we've spent enough on oil. We cannot be a prisoner to this addiction. And therefore, Germany has invested in green power. Therefore, Denmark, an oil importing nation, has invested in green power. Spain, an oil importing nation, has invested in green and in solar energy. China, an oil importing nation, has also invested in green energy. Bitumen should stay in the ground because the mines and the steam plants have now destroyed nearly 1 million hectares of boreal forest. That's an area 6 times larger than the city of New York, and in the process has nearly exterminated woodland caribou. I mean, all the predictions are that within the next 25 years, woodland caribou in the region will be gone. And if woodland caribou will be gone, what will remain of the culture of the Dene and the Métis and the Cree in that forest? Bitumen should stay in the ground because the revenue generated by this mega project, and the majority of it is going into federal coffers. 42% of all the revenue generated is going to federal coffers. Because it has not been saved for future generations. It has not been prudently managed. Harper has done the same thing that Margaret Thatcher did with oil revenues in England. He has spent them funding his political revolution. By 2020, industry will have generated $120 billion in royalties and taxes, and the majority of that, 42%, or approximately $51 billion, will have gone to the federal government, not Alberta. Bitumen should stay in the ground because we don't want to have this conversation with our grandchildren. And the conversation would go like this. Grandfather, did you do this? Do what? Did you frack rock in northern British Columbia and create thousands of earthquakes, some of them of magnitude as high as 4.8, to extract methane so that you could pipe this so-called cheap gas to Alberta to boil water to make steam and melt tar? Did you do that, grandfather? And the grandfather would have to say, yes, we did that. And then the grandchild would ask, and, well, did you use more natural gas to make hydrogen to help turn bitumen into synthetic crude so that North Americans could drive 4-ton vehicles for 5 kilometers to sports clubs to spend 15 minutes riding stationary bikes? And the answer to that question is, yes, we're doing that right now. That's not the conversation we want our grandchildren to have in this country. So, what should we do? And let me end here briefly. When you have to extract a resource as dirty and costly and high risk as bitumen, business as usual has ended for everything. For your economy, for your politics, and for the future in general. And for a resource with such incredibly poor energy returns. So there are a number of things I can encourage you to do. We need to pressure our politicians for a national carbon tax. Cap and trade won't do it. A national carbon tax will. We need to dramatically power down. We are all guilty of consuming too much energy because we live in an economy that encourages us to do that. That's what the economy is all about. It's all geared to get us to spend more energy. We need to make sure that we develop renewables in a different way than we have developed fossil fuels. We cannot turn our rural communities and our First Nations into sacrifice zones for green energy. High energy spending, and that's been our major problem. We have to replace it with low energy spending, and I just want to, but the implications of that are entirely positive. That means instead of acting like consumers, if we spend less energy, then perhaps we will return again and reoccupy our roles as citizens. If we spend less energy, and we've spent so much craving speed and speeding up life. Well, if we spend less, does that not mean that we will actually enjoy our lives and slow things down? You know, we all know the perils of fast food. What's wrong with eating slowly and living slowly? Spending less energy means instead of being completely distracted by all of our high-spending digital gadgets, perhaps we will become more engaged, more connected, more present. Spending less energy perhaps means that instead of focusing on quantity, which is what the whole damn thing is often about, that maybe now we can begin to focus on quality. So in the end, we don't need any more pipelines in this country, but we really do need a functioning rail service that can transport Canadians from one coast to another on trains running on hydropower. That would be a natural national project that our grandchildren would be proud of. And to do all this, I think we all need more hope. And St. Augustus, or St. Augustine put it best. He said, you know, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to change what needs to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I considered talking about atmospheric radiation, emission, the composition of the atmosphere, but really, I don't think that would make for a very fun evening. Maybe it would for some of you. It would certainly be fun for me. But let me talk to you instead about why we have the confidence that we do in the science that we have. When we talk about something like, you know, a scientific claim like, if we burn all of there was a relatively recent study that came out that said, if we were to burn all of the fossil fuel that we have access to, we would reach, you know, these thresholds of mass extinction and melt all the methane in the polar, in the tundra region, and the polar ice, melt the polar ice cap, and so on. So all of these, these are predictions that scientists make, and so what are these based on? Why should we have as much confidence in these claims or predictions as we do? And what I want to convey is that climate science, scientists have a very particular way of working and a very particular culture, especially when they're talking not to each other but to the public. And scientists don't like to make claims confidently. They like to say only what they can say. They like to say it very precisely. And as a result, that can come across as sounding like they have less confidence in their findings than they actually do. And ultimately, I think it comes across as us having less confidence in these scientific results than we actually do. And that's been very useful to Stephen Harper and to the people that are the fossil fuel lobbies, to say, look, these scientists don't talk very confidently. They talk about uncertainty. They talk about ranges of possibilities. They talk about ranges of different scenarios. Why should we believe them when if we take any kind of action on it, it'll cost all these jobs? The truth is, climate science is based on a very solid footing. So this climate science is actually not it's not really at the forefront of scientific theory or theorizing. You know, I have friends that I studied physics with, were working on string theory. I have other friends who were doing biophysics and who are now working in a lab where they're changing cell lines, so they can actually change a skin cell into a bone cell. Like, those are extraordinary scientific advances, and they're creating the theory as they go to do these things. As far as the climate science that we use to describe what's happening in the atmosphere, these are observations that go back many decades. You know, we have an instrumental record that goes back many decades for temperature. We have measurements and experiments about how gases in the atmosphere, well, the gases that occur in the atmosphere, the experiments are done typically down here, not out there. But we know a lot about how gases absorb and emit radiation. Again, experiments that go back you know, many decades, and theories about gases that, you know, go back to the 19th century and are completely sound. So when you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, these are not, it's not like you're going to Nature or Science or one of these scientific journals and reading something that's at the cutting edge, or going to a conference and reading something that's at the cutting edge. These are not that kind of document. The IPCC documents are consensus documents. They are incredibly careful to say things that are just completely, I don't want to say banal, but that's almost, you know, the word to describe it. It's something that everybody knows, everybody expects, and it's minimalist. And that's why every time a new IPCC report comes out, the predictions are, it's much worse than we said last time. And it's an artifact of the way they put it together. There's a conservative bias in the reports because they don't want to make alarmist claims, so they make conservative claims. And inevitably, every time they update their work, the new observations are that things have gotten worse. Things have gone beyond their predictions. When we talk about the climate, we're talking about a complex system. And you know, you've all heard of this idea that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Thailand, it causes a hurricane in the Caribbean or something. And the reason for that is that it's called in mathematics, there's a sensitivity to initial conditions. I'm sure you've heard the character from Jurassic Park talking about this. But in a complex system, if there's many variables and they all interact with one another, then a small change in one of the variables will propagate out and cause potentially big changes later. The thing is, it's a complex system, but it's still physics. And the reason physics is we're able to make predictions using actual equations in physics, and we're able to do so much in physics that we're, you know, only recently able to do in other sciences, is precisely because we're isolating variables. We're looking at simple systems. So it's complex from a mathematical perspective. It's difficult to understand mathematically, but as far as the system goes, it's far simpler than a biological system or an ecological system, and it's far simpler than a social system. So the idea, the reason I say this is because there is absolutely no comparison between the confidence that we have as a society about the claims that we're hearing in the IPCC reports about the climate, and the confidence of the politicians that make predictions about what these policies, what good climate policy would do to the economy. The economy is, compared to the climate, vastly more complex, vastly more unpredictable. And as a social construction, which is what an economy is, it's actually amenable to decisions and policy and management or adjustment and politics. And we could we could vote, we could make decisions collectively about what we want to do in the economy. We can't actually do that. We can't vote and decide on what the temperature is going to be tomorrow. That's a physical system that constrains what we can do socially. So the reason that politicians can say this is going to cost 250,000 jobs or whatever is precisely because they don't have a scientific basis to make that claim. They're really just they're just saying a number. It doesn't have any meaning behind it. And so the confidence of that conservative politician looks like it's really based on something compared to the kind of cagey, careful, qualified statements of a scientist. But in fact, it's the exact opposite of what's going on. The politician has nothing behind what he's saying. The scientist has a gigantic body of evidence and theory going back decades. So in order for something to be scientifically sound, then I would say I don't think it has to be. It doesn't actually have to meet the high bar of climate science. It actually just has to have a few criteria. In order to be scientific, in order to kind of use a scientific method, you basically have to be explicit about your assumptions, you have to have evidence for your claims, and you have to have consistency. So in the climate context, that means, if you put a column of carbon dioxide in a container and you watch what happens with the radiation, if another person does the same experiment, they should get the same results, and they do. That's scientific consistency. And so you can make relatively more or less scientific predictions about things like the economy. That's not often done, but it's possible to do. And when we talk about sciences like ecology, which is where a lot of the predictions about extinction and a lot of the other problems associated with rising temperatures come from, ecological science is not on that same solid theoretical footing. Ecology is one of those more cutting-edge sciences where we're figuring things out and we're building the theory as we go. But there is some theory, there are some things we talk about in ecology that are particularly important to the climate issue. One is the idea of disturbances and the idea of threshold effects. So in an ecosystem, which is a set of organisms or populations that interact with one another, have predator-prey interactions, competitive interactions. In an ecosystem, you can get a disturbance, a fire coming through, or a hurricane, or any kind of, a perturbation, an asteroid falling, something. In such an ecosystem, you can have a disturbance, and that could be part of an ecosystem. Some disturbances are part of an ecological functioning. So the boreal forest, for example, has fires. Periodic fires are part of what happens in the boreal forest. The species of the boreal forest are adapted to fire. The same goes for the prairies. They're adapted to fire. But if you change the frequency, the intensity, the rate of disturbances, you may have what's called a threshold effect. So if you have lots and lots, if you have much more fire because there are higher temperatures and drier periods, which is what our models do predict, if you have progressively more fires, you may end up not having a forest anymore. It may eventually become a fire-adapted grassland. So that threshold effect leads to a change of state, and that is what, that's what keeps all these scientists up at night when they're looking at the ecology and the ecological effects of climate change. The other side of that is resilience, and again, all of these things have some kind of metaphorical connection to society, right? Society is a kind of an ecosystem. We are organisms, we interact with one another and with our environment. we interact with other species and with the environment. So thinking of society as an ecosystem, thinking of the disturbances that will be caused by climate change is a useful way to think as an environmentalist. I definitely would argue that's a useful way to think. The other side of that is resilience. So, ecosystems that function well and are healthy can have more resilience, so they can handle disturbances and recover from disturbances in a way that more vulnerable ecosystems can't. If you've had too many shocks in the past, then it's harder to recover. So that kind of resilience is something that I think we can build as a matter of social action and political action. I did want to mention, and I know Carolyn's going to talk about these kinds of issues as well, but the LEAP manifesto that was launched, Martin Lukács had an article in The Guardian where he said, why are these politicians more upset about the possibility of rising wages than they are about the possibility of rising sea levels, right? And I think that's the kind of thinking about the difference between a physical system and social change that I think we should be doing more of. And just to conclude, I wanted to say that social systems and social change, not social change, let's just say the social system and the economic system have a range of impacts on the physical world and the ecosystems on which our life and our society depends. And I think it's worth mentioning that the climate isn't our only problem. And the reason I have to mention this, Naomi Klein's book has a chapter on geoengineering. So I think that the idea is, okay, well you have a problem with climate change. Well, that's okay. We'll just inject sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere to block some of the sun's rays, and then that'll solve your little climate problem and create profits and all kinds of wonderful capitalist side effects. So that's not a good way to think about it, because it's kind of isolating a problem that's actually a bigger social problem, which is capitalism and the idea that we can do whatever we want technologically and socially and not have any consequences for the ecosystem. So there's geoengineering, there's the possibility, there's all kinds of nuclear problems, which is another, environmentalists have also gone in that direction where they say, okay, you're worried about climate change, you want the tar sands to stay to close, then obviously you have to support nukes. So we have a campaigner who was passing around a flyer about how nukes are not the answer, and I think I have to agree. There's also, there's soil loss, there's colony collapse disorder from bees, there's, the potential of fisheries collapsing, there's oceans that are being polluted. So there's a wide range of things that could get us unless we change the way that the system operates and the way that we think about the relationship between society, the economy, capitalism, and nature. And I think that the last point I just want to make is all of these things, that Andrew describes in his book and that Andrew was talking about, everything that Harper has done in the past few years, or the past 10 years, depends on scientific literacy being perpetually lower. And that there's a deliberate attack on scientific literacy as well. So the idea that you can't trust the science. Science is not something you can have confidence in. And it's been deliberately undermined. And Andrew, you mentioned something really interesting, that no oil exporter has ever made a transition to renewables. And I thought that was fascinating, because I was thinking that it's the oil exporters that are actually attacking science and scientific literacy. So like I taught in 2008, I taught in Pakistan a course on critical thinking, and I remember thinking like everything, so much that was bad that was happening in Pakistan ultimately can be traced to money from Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is about to execute some young man by crucifixion, and Harper's negotiating a secret deal with, I think, some of the, with the Saudis right now, with the Saudi regime right now. And I just see this like, what Harper's been doing in the past 10 years has been to kind of take Canada in that kind of Saudi kingdom direction, like hating science, removing democratic constraints on their, whatever freedom of action, undermining climate agreements. And so there is an attack on science that I think is always a part of this. And I don't think anything good can come out of dismissing science, but I do think that if there's one thing that's come out that's good about the attack on science and scientists here, it's been that, hopefully more people might realize that the place of science is not with the elite, but it's more, the place of science is with the people and as a tool of the people. So I hope that you can think of science that way, and you can think of scientists that way. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
So Carolyn Egan is joining us on the panel, just so you know what's going on, but we are going to stick to the order and go to Jessie Cardinal next, and she's going to up. So it'll just take a second to set up the Skype. Actually, she's already Skyping.
Hello? Hi. Hi everyone. Sorry, the lighting's not the greatest here, so how's the sound?
It sounds good. We can hear you well.
Okay. So are we ready? Should I use my
I don't think we had time to set it up, so maybe just go ahead.
Okay, I was asked kind of short with notice to do a presentation on I guess I'm not really sure what. something to do with Indigenous.
So you cut out.
It froze.
So maybe just give it a second.
Jess, if you're watching, you froze.
Am I back?
Yeah, your voice is maybe
Yeah, I have a pretty bad cold, so sorry about that too.
okay, go ahead. We'll just, I think think the video is what's making it stick, so we'll just watch your voice. We'll just listen to your voice.
Lana, I just sent you that presentation. Can you download it really quick? Because it would be good for people to have something to look at.
Okay, maybe in that case, we'll go to Carolyn next.
Oh.
Set that up. So,
Okay.
Ready?
you can put the lights back on.
Or I could go ahead. I mean, that's...
Okay. Well, I'll call you back in a sec. Okay, so apologies for the technical difficulties. But we do have Carolyn Egan, and I already read your bio, so everyone knows who you are.
All right, well, thank you very much, and apologizing very much for missing the earlier presentations. It meant no disrespect at all. I'm a rank and file activist with the Steelworkers, and my local was meeting in another part of the hall. So I want to bring you greetings from our union, United Steelworkers here in Toronto, and 14,000 members that we represent here. And firstly, I want to say I know there are differences in the trade union movement. I know there have been differences between the trade union movement and environmentalists in times past, but hopefully those are times past. And I want to start by saying that I strongly support Linda McQuaig's comments that got her into so much trouble. And what she said, I'm sure most of you know it, but a lot of people recognize that a lot of the oil sands oil may need to stay in the ground if we're going to meet our climate change targets. There was quite an uproar about those comments. But I think that anyone looking at the situation that we are experiencing and would come to that same conclusion. And putting an end to the destruction of the planet and the winning of a world of climate justice is absolutely critical in these times. It's a major struggle of the times in which we live. And I believe that will require a radical transformation of our society and our relationship to the earth. In our area council here, we strongly support the growing resistance led by Indigenous peoples and with the support of environmental labor and community groups. And what we're trying to do is tackle the question of how to connect the fight against austerity, the fight against the job losses that so many of our members are experiencing, to the ecological revolution and the need to heal our relationship with nature. Our members in Toronto, and this was the same many other places across this country, keenly felt the effects of the economic crisis and the job loss that followed. Most in this city are racialized men and women representing the diversity of our community. And with the huge job losses, I think we all understand that the extractive industries are using people's desperation to promote their projects, and an industry that in my mind is the least efficient in creating jobs and the most efficient at destroying the planet on which all our jobs actually depend. We see so many flowing out, or we did, now times have changed, to Alberta looking for work because they were losing their homes, their marriages were breaking up, they lose their livelihood. So we believe clearly that a strong commitment to combating climate change and replacing exploitative industries with sustainable jobs needs to be part of the partnerships that we are in the process of developing. While the tar sands are promoted on the basis of jobs, pitting workers against the planet, we are trying to build a movement against austerity, linking labor with climate justice. And this is critical in my mind. Canada has the ability to create new and better jobs as a planned transition to a much more energy efficient and environmentally sustainable economy. Through regulations of the corporate sector and major public investments, it could create hundreds of thousands of green jobs. If the federal government were to invest $30 billion over a 10-year period in climate change adjustments, including just transition, economic benefits would include the creation of 330,000 jobs, an additional 140 million into the GDP, the repayment of 30 billion public investments in 10 years to increase tax revenues, an additional 95 billion in personal income, and 28 billion in energy cost savings, according to the statistics of the Canadian Labour Congress. So when we talk about the alternatives, it's not pie in the sky. And this is what we have to make clear to our members and to everyone, the communities that we're dealing with, that this is possible. We do not need the tar sands. We do not need the rape of the earth that we're seeing out there. But corporate Canada is driven by profits. not concerns about the lives of indigenous peoples and the communities they're destroying, or the workers in their industries, or the health of the planet. Jobs versus the environment was an argument that used to divide us, trade unionists from environmentalists from others. But as I said earlier, hopefully it is gone, and gone for good. Our area council, our steelworkers here, were involved in 2008 in the heart of the economic crisis in a summit where over 1,000 people came together in this city. Environmentalists, trade unionists. It was the most racially diverse conference that I think ever took place in this town. Every community in the city was represented. And we founded out of that the Good Jobs for All Coalition, and I underline the word all. And our intent was to have every participant coming out of that conference, no matter what ideas they came in with, as a committed environmentalist. Whether you were a laid-off worker, a racialized youth from Rexdale or Malvern, a community activist, we had to link our issues if we were all to survive, and the planet was to survive. So we based that coalition on three prongs: fight against the economic crisis, fight against the environmental crisis, and the fight for equity, equality in job opportunities that had been denied so many. We're a very long way here from northern Alberta, but we bring our solidarity to those much closer, fighting for a sustainable world. Now we've seen the climate destruction. I think anyone looking just at the world on the East Coast, Hurricane Sandy in New York City. And if you remember the climate march, 400,000 a year ago in New York City, not even a year ago, trade unions of all sorts participated in that because they saw the devastation that climate change brings. You can look back to Katrina. There are examples all over the world. Trade unionists joined those 400,000. They were part of organizing those 400,000 because they cut through the argument it's jobs versus the environment. As people have been saying, there are no jobs on a dead planet. And we joined here, the 25,000 who marched in Quebec City earlier this winter, the 10,000 who marched in Toronto. And we want to bring concrete alternatives to our members and members of the communities in which we live. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but we're fighting very hard to have what we call community benefits, a network we set up pushing Metrolinx, which is in charge of the big transit development going on in the GTA, that there's got to be decent jobs for racialized youth from the affected communities. And when we bring together youth, laid-off workers, as I say, community activists, etc., we cannot have decent jobs in this world, in this era, without making them green jobs. And we want to stop the understanding that the only way you can get a well-paid job in this country anymore is in the resource extraction industry, which drove so many in this city, Newfoundland, other areas of the country, out to the tar sands. We're in a fight to create good green jobs. And through this fight, we're hoping that our members and those with whom we work understand the connection between fighting for jobs, fighting the austerity agenda, fighting against the austerity agenda, and fighting for a sustainable future. This is incredibly important. We have to build an alternative to tar sand jobs and create opportunities for those who have been so long denied. There was a conference that took place a little while ago in September, No Jobs on a Dead Planet, Trade Unions Climate Summit. It was a labor conference that took place in Paris 80 days prior to the United Nations climate meeting, COP21. Union members from across the globe came together, from the Solomon Islands, from Bangladesh, from India, the Philippines, Brazil, the United States, Canada, many more. And there was an urgency to the discussions they were having, recognizing the natural disasters that had been devastating the lives of working people and the poor because of climate change. And they're trying to put the needs of working people on the agenda. Unions, this is a quote, have been disappointed to see that workers and their families have been left out of the draft climate agreements and have called on the presidency to ensure just transition language is reinstated, said the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. We see the wars, we see the refugee crisis, the ongoing attacks of corporations and governments to the austerity agenda. And these are making the lives of ordinary people more and more desperate. And the ruling elites in every country are ignoring the devastation of our climate in the name of increased profits. That's what we're all about. The whole issue of climate jobs must be front and center, as well as public ownership of our national resources. Groups like trade unions for energy democracy have been raising these important points and developing educational presentations and actions involving rank and file members, because we believe the issues cannot be left to our leaders alone. It's something that all of us have to discuss. As this was happening in Paris, a press conference was taking place in Toronto, presenting the LEAP Manifesto, and I imagine many of you are familiar with that. A call for a Canada based on a caring for the earth and one another. A number of months earlier, a two-day symposium was held here with representatives from indigenous groupings from all over the country, environmental organizations, unions, and some community organizations to discuss our visions for a sustainable future and to dialogue about differences, past and present. It was a very productive coming together of people, many of whom had never worked together before. And out of it came the climate change, the organizing for the Climate Change March, which brought out the 10,000 in the city in July. This was much broader than the original meeting and drew out a very diverse gathering. And the march was not meant to be a one-off, and the work continued. The LEAP Manifesto was a product of the ongoing dialogue and incorporates a strong anti-racist class perspective, recognizing the inherent rights of indigenous peoples and taking a strong stand against the austerity agenda. The old divisions between job and the environment that I talked about earlier are disappearing while working together. Trade unionists, community organizations, environmentalists with the active involvement and leadership of indigenous peoples are coming together in a strong, united front to take on governments and corporations who are trying to drive us all down. It's not going to be an easy struggle. Who's going to win or lose is an open question. But coming together in the way we're doing, I think, has to be the way forward. The manifesto states that research shows it's feasible for Canada to be 100% of its electricity from renewable resources within 2 decades, and demands that it starts now, and that communities should collectively control these new energy systems. It calls for programs to build energy-efficient homes, high-speed rail and affordable public transit in place of pipelines and exploding trains that endanger and divide us. It also called for a national child care policy and other services that are desperately needed in our communities. It declared that austerity is a fossilized way of thinking that has become a threat to life on Earth. This is a call to action, and town hall meetings will be taking place across the country to organize locally. And as the manifesto ended, it said, now is the time for boldness, now is the time to leap. And I think that's exactly the moment we find ourselves at. And I will tell you, having been part of that process, that 2-day symposium, the climate march, and the organizing that we did here to get our members out, it gives me great hope to see what Shell just did. Y'all saw that, right? Shell decided to cease and desist exploration in the Arctic. I was up in Alaska in June, and I met with indigenous peoples, I met with workers up there as well. And the fact that they're saying it's because they already invested $7 billion. They're saying it's because, you know, the cost of oil. But many of the reports on CBC, the BBC, and others said it's also because of the strength of a growing movement against environmental degradation and for climate justice. And this is changing the terrain. And I think it gives us tremendous hope and optimism that we have the capacity to use the collective strength that is ours to change that terrain and change it in a way that will save the planet, hopefully, but also our own future, and build a new society based on people, the needs of people, and not profits. So as desperate as things may appear right now, I'm tremendously hopeful. I'm seeing the changes that have taken place in unions, and it's a long struggle too. All the unions aren't there, all the leadership isn't there, we know that. But nonetheless, the change is taking place, and I think the alliances that are being built by you all and all of us who have an involvement in this struggle are going to really reap some wonderful, wonderful victories. There'll be losses as well, but I think we can look to the future and say if we continue the track that we're on, we can win and we can beat them and we can save our world. Thank you very much.
you so much, Carolyn. Okay, I think this is going to work now. So if we can hit the lights again. And Jesse, are you with us?
Mm-hmm.
Jesse?
Sorry, I had to unmute.
Okay, great. So, I'm going to minimize this.
I was looking at the crowd and some of them are yawning, so I had to turn the screen off. It was making me yawn because it's only 6:30 over here, so I'm just getting my night started.
Okay. So we have, can someone fix this? Okay, we're good. We're good to go.
Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick introduction. Tansi, Jesse Cardinal, Nancy Gustin, Kikino Chindia, Niumichi Uawaka, Kate Kana Wita, Kate Nipi, Ikone, Ayisiniwa, Inoti, Otaskata, Kip Kisi, Nakati Take, Nipi Osam Nipi Oma, Ima Tiwi Yimaga. My name is Jesse Cardinal from Kikino, and I'm with Keepers of the Water, and it's people who work to protect water, and that water is sacred. I'm currently taking the HEO1, so I'm learning to speak what was my language as well. So I sent Lana over a PowerPoint presentation. I think this will be better than just me coming up with stuff. And it'll kind of give you hopefully a picture of what's happening in Alberta from Keepers of the Athabasca perspective. Lana?
Yeah?
We have the slide.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, so the first one is Keepers of the Water. And Keepers of the Water back in 2006, there was on the Mackenzie way up in the Northwest Territories on the Mackenzie River, there was elders at that time who were already being concerned about the water.
Just tell me when to switch slides.
Hello?
Yeah, we're still here.
Yeah.
We're here.
Okay, yeah, because it cuts out on my end. And so it says that water is sacred and that we need to work to protect it. And so I'm with Keepers of the Athabasca. If you go to slide 3. And Keepers of the Athabasca watershed, the river itself is a spur and it flows all the way down and keeps on going through Fort McMurray, Fort Mackay, and all the way into Northwest Territories. And so I'm with Keepers of the Athabasca, and we're a part of the Greater Keepers of the Water. And if you look at this other map on slide 3, you'll see some of the Arctic Basin, and so it's quite large. You have the Peace, the Mackenzie, and these are all watersheds that are connected. Slide 4. Hello?
Yeah, we just have us on mute, so it's a little.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm following.
Okay, just so it would be good if maybe you can point it to the slide so that I know that you're switching when so that I just can get disconnected. So on slide 4, this is one of the events that we hosted annually. It went for 5 years, and it was the Healing Walk. The website is still active if you guys want to look at it. There's some really great videos on there, pictures, good information about the tar sands. And we decided to end the Healing Walk in 2014, just because it seemed like that the focus was only on Fort McMurray at the time, and that there were other communities that weren't getting the attention that they so dearly need. I think people that, you know, think of tar sands and aren't really from the area, they think Fort McMurray only, and there's issues all over in the tar sands deposits. There's one great big deposit in the Peace region, in the Fort McMurray Wabasca region, and in the Coal Lake region. And so we really wanted to help work with these other communities that need our help. However, it just so happened that this year in 2015 that the community itself, one of the First Nation communities in the Fort McMurray region, hosted a healing gathering, and it was really nice, because it was nice to know that we're still going to continue having events up there. Keepers of the Athabasca Health, so they did medicine workshops, traditional workshops. They brought in different Indigenous people to do healing work. And so the plan is for Fort McMurray First Nation to continue hosting healing gatherings. So they do go to the tar sands, but it's changed a little bit. So it's no longer the tar sands healing walk. This year it was called a healing gathering. So on slide 5. Well known, because there's two types of mining. There's open pit mining and there's in situ mining. Most people don't even know about in situ mining or really understand open pit mining because of the tailings ponds. And if you look at that first picture, there's the Athabasca River flowing, and those are tailings ponds right beside the Athabasca River, and there's about a 2-kilometer separation that separates those toxic tailings ponds from the Athabasca River. And there have been studies that say that the tailings ponds are seeping, and like the fellow mentioned earlier, that's something that our governments have chose not give the credit where it's due, but we know that they're leaking. And so that just shows you, and the thing about tailings ponds too that I'm not sure if people know is there's no cure, there's no treatment for tailings ponds. So every time another tailings pond is made, it's all a science experiment right now. So right now when companies are getting approved for projects, and then they go to their environmental assessment and they say, well, you know, these are our tailings ponds, this is how we're going to treat it. It's all based on a science experiment. There's nothing proven right now to say that we have a safe way or even any kind of way to do anything with these. Right now, what they're approving on is something called end-pit lakes, where they take the heavy stuff out of the tailings ponds, and it's supposed to sink to the bottom and then become kind of like a lake where fish swim and birds swim and stuff like that. And that's in the very early stages. That's not even, we don't even know if that's gonna work. And so that's tailings ponds. Slide 6. Just a little bit about the tailings ponds. So the birds are always they're always attracted to the tailings pond. So in the first picture, that's a picture of the tailings pond. The second picture I took on my way to Montana one time, just to show you how a bird could easily think that that's, you know, a freshwater body to land on. And we have like some documented reports of ducks perishing. Recently we had, I think, blue herons perishing. These are just the ones documented. Like, my speculation is that there's a whole lot of birds that are dying all the time in tailings ponds. So slide 7. Oh, and just really quick on slide 6. There was a report by World Watch Dog. They estimate over the death toll of 166 million birds over the next 50 to 60 years in the tar sands area. So slide 7, oil spills, they're happening regularly. This one, this first slide is the CNRL spill. The second slide is the Lubicon spill. The CNRL spill was, there's two types of in situ mining. So there's open pit mining and in situ mining. In situ mining is surpassing open pit mining in Alberta. And there's two types of in situ mining. There's SAGD, which some of you may have heard of. It's steam assisted gravity, which is putting steam in the ground, warming it up, bringing it up in pipes. And then the CSS, cyclic steam stimulation, or huff and puff. Dr. Kevin Timoney has stated that this shouldn't even be a method that's used. So in this case, in the first picture, it was the huff and puff or CSS that was used. And basically what it did was it cracked the earth in all kinds of places, and oil came, and it's not oil, it's crude. It was heated everywhere, and this is the result of what happened. That happened in 2013. There was a report of an oil spill happening in that same location in 2009. The First Nation people still believe that that oil spill is spilling. And it's really hard to say because it's in a military zone, so it's not easily accessible to even get to assess it. So this is just some of the kinds of things we're seeing in Alberta. And then the second one, if you go to the Greenpeace website, you can read more about the Lubicon spill where, you know, people were getting sick, they had to evacuate the community. We recently hosted a gathering up in northern Woodfarm in Dene country in High Level, and they've had numerous spills, pipeline failures and spills into their territory, and they're telling us these spills are not being cleaned up properly. So the AER, the Alberta Energy Regulator, and companies will go on media and say that everything's fine, the cleanup is done, and it's the communities that are left with it. And the community out on this land, they see it firsthand, and they're telling us, no, it's not cleaned up, it's still there. And so those are issues of, you know, not proper cleanup. Slide 8 is just more on oil spills. Just they're all the time. Like pipeline spills happen all the time. The biggest one in Canadian history, the Nexon spill. When did that happen? That was in about June, July, and that happened in the Fort McMurray region. That was a year-old pipe, and this was a system that was supposed to be a world-class mechanical system that would like fail-proof almost. And it was only a year, the pipe itself was only a year old, and it was a system failure. That was an Asian-owned company, I think it's Japanese. And again, that's only about maybe 10 kilometers from a First Nation community. And so, and we were phoning people in that community because we know quite a few people in the Fort McMurray First Nation, and they weren't even being told, first of all, that there was a spill. Like, there should have been people going door to door to say there's a spill, the wind is going to be blowing this way at this time, you know, because they're downwind of this toxic stuff. And again, the cleanup and just the devastation and again, what this fellow talked about earlier, like the social impacts are huge. So slide 9, what's at stake? These are some of the ducks that have perished in the tailings ponds, and that's the Athabasca River in its better form. Just you can see the boreal forest, and it's just so rich and so much, you know, like there's so much life there. So slide 10, a little bit on monitoring. The monitoring, we have the progressive conservative government in Alberta. They were in power for 44 years. They're very focused on only the oil industry. We're very closed-minded on diversifying our economy. Anybody who tried to speak out against the oil industry or the tar sands industry were basically labeled as terrorists and things like that. And so at that time, the monitoring was very poor. It was when Jim Prentice, I think, was the Premier of Alberta, that they actually went on record and said that Alberta had a world-class monitoring system, which most people in Alberta knew not to be true. So that was interesting. And but they were trying. They were trying to get this world-class monitoring system. They had aspirations, which was good. So I mean, groups like us, we were all working, we were names. And what I find is there's a lot of confusion, a lot of kind of arguing over where the money's coming from, where the money's going, which kind of monitoring is going to be done. And from an Indigenous perspective, we're just left out of it all. We're like, hello, we have lots of monitoring techniques, we have lots of information we could provide to help monitoring. That none of that was taken into consideration. So there's been a lot of frustration from the First Nations and the Métis in the area to even move this forward, and it kind of seems to be stagnant. And I'm just like, part of the message I'm trying to get is like, when we have governments and when we have even in other INGOs and people that are really going to listen to the Indigenous people, then we'll move forward. But if there's always going to be experts and discrediting the Indigenous knowledge, then we're going to continue on the way we're going. Slide 11, the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan. They aspired to, because it was just like it's been chaos in Alberta, like the oil industry, the gas industry. Andrew can speak to that, like the fracking. It's been one big free-for-all. And so the government put in the land use management framework, and so they broke Alberta into all these different sections. And basically, what they were trying to do was create some kind of how to use the land. One of the first areas they went to tackle was the tar sands area, the Fort McMurray area, which is known as the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan. And so they broke that into different policies. So you have our frameworks. You have surface water quantity framework, surface water quality framework. You have tailings ponds management. And again, I attended meetings for 2 years, both as keepers of the Athabasca and keepers of the Athabasca and sorry, just as a Métis person, and very little of our input was, by the end, like the beginning of the draft to the final draft, I was like, wow, this hasn't changed. And so we're really hoping with this new NDP government that that we're going to see some change, that they're going to review it. And yeah, so that's the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan. There's a lot of issues with that. I'm going to go into what's at stake really quick. This is Francois Paulette. He's a Dene leader from Fort Smith area, Northwest Territories. And so back to water. Water is sacred. Water levels are dropping. So it's a little bit confused when we talk about climate change and they say sea levels are rising. There is some contradiction, because actually, like inland here in Alberta, water levels are dropping. And so this year, the Athabasca River was one of its lowest. And now we have all kinds of studies coming out saying, you know, there was continuous drought. Like there was a study recently done that went back 800 years. And they said, we've seen, you know, consecutive years of drought. And then in the 30s, there was drought. So yes, the water levels drop and people are like, oh, it's normal. Well, no, it's not normal, because we have climate change, and what's contributing to climate change is these industries. So back in the day, people could survive low water levels. You know, there was water to be had, because there was still lakes, there was still streams, there was still water. Today, we're competing with industry for our water. And the PC government, what they had did was put industry have first access to water. And so right now as it stands, this is some of the work that the environmental organizations are trying to do, is place water as a human right as #1, because how it's been set up in Alberta is that we're like, I don't know, 3rd, 4th, or 5th after all the industries. So it's a huge concern as we move forward and the water levels continue to drop, and we're dealing with climate change. It's not the same as it was. We could have survived it back then, but now we have industries that are taking our water. And so I'm just going to skip through here to slide 16. This is just some of the positive, hopeful work that we're doing. So there's northern Saskatchewan, there's uranium companies trying to get in there. There's all kinds of companies trying to get in. That's bush. These people are like bush people. They're Dene. They hunt, they fish, they trap. That is their livelihood. The little kids even are fluent in Dene. And we went there because they put a blockade because the companies were going in and like taking down their trap lines and just doing exactly what they did in Conklin. If you guys ever heard. One of the busiest industrial highways in Alberta. It's one of the most dangerous highways in Alberta, and that's due to in situ mining, and that's Highway 881. And so when they needed help and I saw this highway, I felt sadness, but I also felt hope that there's people that are doing what we should have been doing 15, 20 years ago on Highway 881. And just again, going back to the wildlife, like connecting back with nature. This is just by my place here. The geese, like the first picture is the baby geese, and then that's them all grown up, and they're mostly all heading south now. And we have so much to learn from the wildlife. Like geese are such good parents, you know, they teach their young how to fly, they prepare them for the journey. There's just there is a lot at stake. Number 20, this is one of the projects we did in Fort Chip. It was a pilot solar project. That's the Elders and Youth Lodge. Since then, there have been more solar projects opening up in Indigenous communities. And so we have a lot of hope. We're not only putting it in solar, we need to diversify. So that means a lot of things. And just balance and sustainability, something we can all do, whether you're in the city or the country. If you go to Australia, in the city, everybody has a clothesline. Everybody in the apartment has a clothesline. So even if you're in the city, there's ways you can live sustainably. Hunting, trapping, fishing, that's still very much alive. So I'll just take 1 minute to wrap up here. Hunting, trapping, and fishing. So right now is moose season. Everybody's hunting. And they're not over hunting, but that's how you fill your freezer. It's like, and I find more and more people are going back to the land. Like more people are appreciating their moose meat. They're wanting to hunt because, I mean, meat is getting expensive. And I think it's a good thing that people are going back to the land, and I'm hoping that by doing that, that they're gonna stand up for what's happening to it right now. Harvesting berries, that's huge. Fishing, that's cutting up moose meat. Gardening, these are some past events. We did a healing walk in Coal Lake, healing walk in Fort McMurray. The past and upcoming events, that's events we did in the past. We actually had Andrew Nikiforuk speak at that event. And and then just couple of our elders that we work with, Elder Nancy Scanny and Elder Violet Clark. They're amazing knowledge holders. A lot of what we share about traditional knowledge, they are some of the people that teach us. And so it's a complex situation. Not all Indigenous people up here feel or think the same. right now the tar sands industry is what people are reliant on for their jobs. We are hoping with this new NDP government that they diversify the economy. We need the leadership to lead us into this new world. And I said, like, these $500,000 salaries that people are making now, that's not realistic. Like, it is gonna be a lifestyle change, but we don't have an option. When, like, it's like when you look at like water or no water, it's like, it's not like we really have a choice. So hopefully that you guys got something out of this presentation. Sorry about having to Skype in. It would have been great to be there, and thank you for your time.
Well, we're going to do Q&A. If you can stick around, if not, that's totally okay. Great. Yeah, if we could get some lights, that would be great. Okay, great. So if we can have our speakers back at the table, that would be great. We do have time. If people need to leave, that's totally okay. For those that want to stick around for another 15 minutes or so, I think it's a great opportunity, since we have Andrew here all the way from Calgary, to address any questions you have. So, we'll give it a moment for folks that do need to leave. Thanks for joining us. Sign up to the various sign-up sheets. We have lots of things coming up. And for those that are staying, we're going to take questions. Yes, I'll turn this off. Okay. Oh, and while we're taking questions, John is going to pass around a bucket. If you didn't have a chance to donate, we're just collecting donations towards paying for the space and other logistical things, so you can contribute that way. Okay, so questions. And you'll have to speak up, because I don't think our mics will reach. And we'll take a few at a time. Yes, Jim.
Just as I attend many of these meetings, I guess the concern is that it's been known for a long time we're already over the limit. We can't put any more carbon into the atmosphere. And when we talk about global warming, it's kind of a misnomer, because people refer to the temperature in the atmosphere, and it's really about net retention of energy in the Earth system. Most of it is in the oceans, and it's going to come out. So I know that we have to talk about reality in terms of a society and the political systems as they are throughout the world, but I think it needs to be said that we're already past the limit. We can't afford to put anything more into the atmosphere. That means full stop on the tar sands right now. Again, I know that doesn't mesh with the political and social realities. And there's so many jobs to be had in retrofitting our leaky homes. We need public transportation. TTC needs to be free. And when they say there's no money, there's lots of money. There's always money for war. There's money for fossil fuel subsidies. And there's money to go into offshore accounts. So I just wanted to say, I think we have to face this reality. Most of the increase in temperature has been in the last decade or so, not since 1788, but it's happened recently. And we're already seeing the effects of the temperature rise as it is, and there's a lot more in the oceans ready to come out. So comments?
Okay. John, in the back. Actually, if we can get folks to use the mic so that Jesse Cardinal can hear the questions, that would be great. So Dave can move as far as he can, but you'll have to meet him halfway.
That Linda McQuaig incident was really weird. What she said, everybody knows. The governments know it. The governments say it even. Even Harper, in his way, says it. The objection to McQuaig wasn't that it was wrong. It was you're not supposed to say that out loud. It's blasphemy. There's something holy involved here. And we should think what this holiness is that protects the tar sands. It's the balance sheets of the corporations. That is, if we leave the tar sands in the ground, it is hard on the profits of certain corporations. And that raises an issue of human rights in my mind. That is, this is not a question of tar sands versus renewable energy. This is a question of respecting human rights. You know, when GM built some lousy cars, they had to stop and they had to pay a price for that. Well, it wasn't much of a price, but even so, the principle is clear. A corporation can't cause untold deaths around the world and get away with it. That's where we should start with. We can't allow Canada to be an agency for aggression against the peoples of the world. Now, I think that in the presentation that's given tonight, there's a basis here for a movement on the tar sands staying in the ground question. That's what Lana was saying, that all what we're doing around Line 9 and other questions is bearing in on this. And we have to join together to work on this in the coming period. And that's enough for me. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Frank?
Yes, I just want to comment on the Cold Lake situation. We have a Canadian military, which is the sole responsibility of the Canadian government, protecting the oil spill disaster that happened and it's still happening, but nobody can get into that Cold Lake area. That happened to be the deepest cold freshwater lake in Alberta, or maybe in Canada. And I think they're ruining it because of the underground spillage that has happened. And I just wanted to add that I'm sure Mr. Nikiforuk would know more about that particular instance. If he could comment further, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
I'll also just add the question of all the parties saying that we can expand the tar sands but decrease emissions. I would love to hear what folks think about that. So we'll go to our speakers now.
Yeah, I'll just quickly address the spills, the bitumen spills that have happened with CNRL at their project which is south of Fort McMurray and which is on Canadian military land in Cold Lake. And like so many of these accidents that happen in the region, there's very little transparency. I know that there is very good documentation that there has been extensive groundwater contamination from these cyclic steam operations, and that it has been ongoing for years. And to what degree it is now affecting, Cold Lake and other lakes in the region, I specifically can't say. I haven't seen the science on that. But I know there's tremendous concern in the region about the volume of water being used and about the steam injection process, which works like hydraulic fracturing. And industry cannot always control where the fracs go. And in this case, the fracs went right to surface and brought boiling steam, boiling bitumen right into groundwater sources as well as marshes and boreal forest. And it was an enormous, enormous leak. Yeah.
So on the idea or the question of, is it too late? Are we already over the threshold? I think what the threshold that I'm worried, yes, climate change is happening. It's too late to prevent it in that sense. But there are the thresholds that we're really concerned about are things like what we call runaway climate change. So at some point, the there's a tremendous amount of methane that's trapped under the, in the Arctic tundra, and if that permafrost melts, then all of that methane is released into the atmosphere. So at that point, we don't have to do anything for climate change to get worse. It doesn't matter whether we stopped emitting, because now there's a whole huge source of emissions, which is the methane. The same goes for the Brazilian, or the rainforests of the Southern Americas. Those are all, in a lot of ways, that's like a gigantic reservoir of carbon, which if it dries and becomes like a fire-prone forest, which it's happening, that again is a source of what we call runaway climate change. So it's too late to prevent 1.5 degrees or wherever we're at now, but it's absolutely not too late to prevent those runaway effects and the mass extinctions and we're talking about, really major changes where the question of how to continue a decent life on the planet is up for grabs. Right now we're talking about major effects and serious tragic effects, but we're not in that world yet, and we absolutely have time to stop that world from coming to pass. And it's not just a matter, I also wanted to say, I was saying, climate change isn't the only problem we have, and it's not. And similarly, tar sands are not the only problem we have. So remember, there's also gigantic reserves of coal sitting in the ground in a whole bunch of countries that haven't even gotten into that yet because they're getting oil. So if we face a situation where there's where oil becomes scarce for whatever reason, then we're going to get into massive coal mining, which is that much more dirty, which is that much more emitting, and there'll be all this talk of clean coal, which is complete nonsense. Just I don't know what to say about the political party statements other than it's just nonsense. This is carbon fuels. You don't burn them and not have, and reduce emissions. That is emissions. It's one of these cases of trying to make us all dumber in order to pass these policies.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to speak about the whole question of political will. And everybody knows what Linda McQuaig said was right, and yet corporations don't want to hear it because it cuts into their profits. I think John and other people have said that, and that's absolutely correct. So the thing is, how do we change that? And how do we mobilize and how do we organize? Because I do believe it is possible to change the political direction at one juncture. We're up against very tough corporations, but as has been said many times, they are few and we are many, and the question of how do we organize to do that. And if we can stop Line 9 like they stopped what is going on in the Arctic, the capacity of stopping, whether it be small or whether it be large, and creating alternative jobs. So many members of the Somali community in the city don't go up to the tar sands because they can't find work anywhere else. All of those questions are very, very real questions, and I think our task is how do we organize in a way that is meaningful to people so they see it's in their interest to be part of this movement and use the power, the collective strength that is ours to put a stop to it as best we can and just build a consensus that this is not the way forward. And that's a huge task, but I think we have the capacity of doing it. But it's what is before us, it's the challenge that's before us.
Okay, now we're going to go over to Jessie Cardinal. Okay. I think she did hear the questions.
Amelia, can you turn on this? We can't hear it. There's no.
Or not?
It's like there's no volume to it at all.
There's no what?
Maybe she's muted it. Did you mute it?
No, it's not muted. Just tell her, does she know she's up?
Sure. Do you want to come up here so everyone can hear you? Do you want to take one?
I think I can make it hear me anyway. My question is, we have these
petroleum companies that are going to be operating now on with the low cost that the low amount that they get for oil as compared with what they did a few months ago. And my question is, how are they managing to make any profit now on the kind of oil that comes out of the tar sands, which is very expensive to produce, and the same thing with where it's fracked. Now, it seems to me that the only reason those companies have survived is because of what is in fact a government subsidy that goes to them, which they don't call a subsidy because it's a reduction in taxes. But they don't pay the same taxes as most other companies do, because this is something that the government wants to promote. So what happens when we get a new government is that I would hope that they would simply stop sending that to those companies, and therefore they wouldn't be able to continue to produce this kind of stuff. They could still produce the oil that normally comes out of the ground under normal circumstances.
Okay, so I think that we've lost Jesse on Skype, so maybe just the speakers who want to respond to this last question, and then, okay, one more question.
I don't know, there's two more questions.
Two more questions, okay, quickly.
Should I ask it now, or?
Yeah.
So my question's really just for Andrew, although, so my question's really just for Andrew, although if anyone else wants to answer, that's all right. So a lot of people have been calling for a carbon tax. It seems to be sort of the preferred way of internalizing the cost of carbon into the economy. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of oil companies have been operating with like they call it a shadow carbon tax or an internal carbon tax. I guess it's kind of in anticipation of a government-imposed carbon tax. I also thought it was interesting that I think it was back in June that there was a letter that was written to the world's governments coming up to the Paris conference, and it was written by and signed by a few CEOs of, I think, Shell, Total, Statoil, basically asking for a carbon tax, which I thought was interesting. So what is that? What do you think that actually is? Is that them looking for a social license to continue operating, or is it because they see the way the world is going and so that's their preferred mode of putting a price on carbon? Or is there something else going on that I don't know about?
Hi, my question's for Andrew as well, but you know. So you were saying earlier how banks are saying that bitumen's going to be a stranded asset, and we all know how multinational companies just love to jump at a new opportunity. So even for things like renewable energy, and there's the fear of people losing their jobs. So how can we prevent privatization of renewable energy and make sure that the resources stay within the country and the jobs are created within the country and not outsourced?
And was there one last one somewhere? Yeah.
So this is kind of directed towards you, Justin. You talked about sort of the attack on science from sort of different political parties and that sort of thing. Apart from sort of groups like this or movements like this that sort of include a lot of like-minded people, is there something in place that's sort of going on now or maybe sort of planned in the future, to combat this sort of attack on science and attack on scientific findings and that sort of thing, to sort of help sway, your everyday person that isn't necessarily a part of sort of the heart and soul of these movements?
Great, thanks so much. Okay, let's start with Carolyn.
I think that most of the questions were directed at you.
Okay, well, let's go directly to Andrew. And yeah.
Let me address the money question first. So the question is, are these companies making money now that oil is 40 bucks a barrel? Yes, many of them are making money, particularly the older mining operations like Suncor, Syncrude, CNRL. They're all making money. They're making, and their cost of production is around 24 bucks a barrel. So they're still making a good dollar at 40 bucks a barrel. The companies that are struggling are the new steam plants. And those are the companies that are having, because they need somewhere between 70 and 90 bucks a barrel to make money. So either they're losing money at this point in time, or they have put their projects off, or are not producing as much, and frantically trying to reduce costs. And so there's a huge cost reduction movement in the tar sands right now. The only time the oil and gas industry ever does any kind of innovation is when they're faced with low prices. The carbon tax question, yes, it's true. There are a lot of oil and gas companies and executives that have supported a carbon tax for a long time, largely because many of them think it's the most direct and practical way of dealing with the liabilities that they have. And but lo and behold, politicians don't like carbon taxes, and you know, so you know, any movement to impose carbon taxes in this country has always been shouted down, in particular by Harper and by other groups.
Why would they not want it if the environmentalists and the oil companies want a carbon tax?
Well, you know, Harper doesn't believe in any form of taxation, nor does he really believe in having any form of government, for that matter, right? Because you know, if you're not being taxed, you're not being represented either. So, it's a problem for a lot of people in the patch. I mean, and as a consequence, I mean, there are a lot of people who work in the oil and gas industry who really feel that Stephen Harper is the worst thing that could have ever happened to them, because the industry is coming very close to losing its social license. And these executives know it, and that's why they're pushing for a carbon tax. And the last question about renewables. Well, how do we make sure then that renewables are developed here in country, and that we're not, you know, buying all of our solar panels from China or all of our windmills from Denmark, and that we're actually, you know, generating jobs here and supporting the manufacturing sector here? You know, it's a damn good question. I'm not sure I have a really good answer for it. But it should be part of a renewable energy program, that with the idea that we try to keep as many jobs as possible in Canada. I mean, when you look at the outsourcing, even for the tar sands, I mean, all of the foreign temporary workers that have been brought in to work on that project, just so multinationals could, you know, have some ridiculous schedule they want to uphold, and because the government of Alberta licensed too many projects too quickly, and all because of low royalty rates. So the companies jumped in there and they said, look, we want to extend our shelf life as an oil and gas company. We can't do that unless we have some bitumen reserves. And that's what the tar sands is all about. It's all about extending the shelf life of fossil fuels. So yeah, you need to have a credible renewable program that begins to really build on some of our strengths, particularly, I would think, in hydropower. And how do you use hydropower to support a lot of renewables, as well as, you know, electric vehicles where it really makes sense, right? So there are certain jurisdictions in Canada like Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Newfoundland, that are perfect places to really push electric cars, because the majority of the electricity being generated is coming from hydro, as opposed to in Alberta, where the majority is being generated by coal. You know, so you need to have very specific programs, and you also need to go back to local communities and ask the communities, well, what's the best point source here that's low carbon, that makes the most sense, and has really the least amount of disruption, because all forms of energy are intrusive and disruptive on the landscape. I mean, I've seen wind farms and that are wind factories that can fragment a rural community as much as a sour gas field or a gas field. And the same thing with solar factories, and that can be have incredible water demands and also fragment the landscape as well. So those are all important scale and impact issues that have to be addressed.
Sorry, just wanted to kind of build on that. If we empower local communities more, wouldn't that eventually advocate for reducing the size of the government, and wouldn't that kind of lead to a conflict between government and society in general, and make the process, the process wouldn't be as easy.
The process is not going to be easy anyway. The process is fraught with all kinds of difficulties. One of the big issues for government, and one of the reasons they don't like to really push renewables in any form, is that it's very hard to tax them, right? Meanwhile, but you can tax oil and gas production, and governments love that. I mean, 30% of the revenue for the government of Alberta is coming from oil and gas still. And of course that revenue is now incredibly volatile with low oil prices. But governments love oil and gas revenue because it means that they don't have to tax their citizens or perform as smartly as they should, right? It's money, it's easy money for them. So how are you going to tax solar panels on somebody's house, right? So it raises a whole other set of questions.
Great, okay, well thanks so much for the questions and the discussion. If you would like to learn way more about this from Andrew, we have a few of his books on sale at the back, no tax. And so one of them is about tar sands, like really in-depth book on the tar sands that essentially predicted a lot of what's going on now. And his newest book is called Slick Water, and it's about fracking. So also related, just came out. He was actually on a book tour and stayed an extra day to be on this panel, so thanks so much for that. And then just an announcement in terms of getting involved and continuing the conversation. A bunch of us are organizing a People's Assembly on the climate. They've happened a few times before in the city, and there's a history of this, obviously, of People's Assemblies in Latin America and elsewhere. This will be happening November 27th to 29th. So we'll have workshops, assemblies, and it'll be an easier way to get involved in the organizing in terms of all the different groups involved. You can also chat with us afterwards if you want to get involved now. There's lots of people from the different groups here today. There's also lawn signs in the back. There's $3 to $5 donations. And I would like to thank very much all of our speakers for joining us today, especially Andrew, who stuck around. And to everyone for coming today. And so if you want to get details about the People's Assembly, there's a sign-up sheet in the back corner. So if you just leave your email, we'll let you know when it's happening, where, and all of that sort of stuff.
Can I make a quick announcement? Friday night, there's a film showing by Cinema Politica Danforth at the Eastminster Church, the Robert Wright film, Inequality for All, which touches on some of the issues we've been talking about tonight. So it's by donation, there's no charge, and 7:30, Friday at Eastminster Church, Inequality for All, with a panel discussion afterward also. Thank you.
All right, my name is D. Shanger. I'm a mod and live stream director here at Occupy Toronto Livestream. Thank you, Rise PDX from Portland, for restreaming us at Occupy Wall Street's live streaming mothership, Lower Red. Alrighty, thank you, Rise. Thank you, everyone. And for those watching live and in the archives, yar.
It's temporary work to allow.
Temporary work, and then nothing at the end of it. It makes no sense.
No,
Yeah.
they're $15 billion mine sites
Yeah.
in Fort McMurray that employ only 800 people a year.
Exactly. I know.
That's
I know.
it.
I know.
Yeah.
It's really,
It's mind-boggling.
it is mind-boggling. But yeah, I'm sorry I was delayed in coming because I missed your actual presentation. But, it's good.
Hi there. How are you?
Yeah, I know.
Or are you able to?
Yes, I can still, even with a broken finger, I can still do that.
Broken